We only want our fair share. We only want what's coming to us. We are here. We contribute to this country. We are part of the neighborhood. We want to be recognized. And really, the work is how do we demand that we are seen and that we are recognized?
Welcome to Identity Unveiled. IU is a platform that supports advancement of Asian American women to the executive ranks. We highlight amazing stories of Asian American women becoming the first in their industry or breaking barriers as executives and leaders.
There's over 1.5 million Asian Americans in New York. And as reported by the Asian American Federation, Asians own over 18% of employer firms in New York City and employ over 555,000 employees and generate nearly 121 billion in economic activity. Where do I get these numbers from? From the Asian American Federation. It is one of the strongest leadership voices advocating for better policies, services, and funding that lead to more justice and opportunity for Asian immigrants, one of New York City's poorest and underserved communities. And joining us today is their Executive Director, Joanne Yu, and Deputy Director, Ju An. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So I'm going to go into our first question. What does the Asian American Federation do?
I think really our mission is to advocate for the most urgent needs of the Pan-Asian community here in New York. You shared a little bit of our research, which we always appreciate, because I think we were just briefly talking about how when we talk about poor and underserved, oftentimes people don't associate those adjectives with the Asian community, but that's what we do through our research. We do with our advocacy, our special programs. We bring attention to the most urgent needs impacting Asian New Yorkers across New York State, whether it's poverty, whether it's mental health, whether it's hate violence, whether it's small business needs. You know, we are an economic driver of New York City, and yet we get very little access to the services to maintain our businesses. So we think about the work that we do as giving voice to the most vulnerable and invisible in our community. And then we work really hard to make sure that they get access to the resources that they need to live a quality of life.
What led to your own desire to work with the AAPI community and with AAF? Like, what led you here?
I grew up in Colorado. So we were one of the all Korean families in my city. So I grew up there, but that was when we immigrated, that was over 50 years ago. So there was no such conversations about language access. There was no such social services set up. Now I think a lot of churches are taking on that role, but I tell my story all the time in different circles. And that is the story that everybody nods their head in the room. They nod their heads in the room when I say, I was the kid that had to go translate for the aunties and uncles, help to fill out job applications for people, all these roles that I served, translating in situations where I didn't even have the words in English or Korean about what that meant. And so, one of the things that we work on here at the Federation is for better language access. And I feel like in many ways I'm fighting for my childhood self, but also for all the other kids who continue to play this role. I shake my head at the system, and I often curse and drop some awesome 4-letter words. And I, say, I can't believe after 50 years that I'm still working on the exact same thing of visibility, language access. Why aren't there better systems to explain policies to people? Why isn't there a better language access program to capture what is happening, to get people through the system? Why is it that our community members are lingering in poverty when they're very much qualified to receive services because of language access? They don't know where to go. There's a lack of information. And that information gap prevents a lot of people from participating fully. So yes, so after over 50 years of having moved to the US, I have to say it yet again. I can't believe I'm still working on this thing.
So Ju, where did you grow up?
I also was born in Korea, and I came here when I was 5. So I didn't go through the school system, but I have immigrant parents who, I think we were just talking about this as a staff yesterday, of how kids who grow up with immigrant parents whether they themselves are immigrants or not, just have to grow up a lot faster than people who may have a lot more access in terms of resources and language. I think for me, the searing experiences that really like formulated my identity was I grew up in Jersey, so just across the river. But I grew up in a time where my brother was pretty severely bullied in middle school and high school. And my parents really, they don't speak English well, so they didn't know how to advocate for him. So my brother, in defending himself, he got suspended from school. And I really saw for the first time how people in power and systems that are supposed to protect you don't protect you actually when you don't speak the language and when you don't look like the majority of people around you. And it was a real injustice. And I think that trauma for my brother personally and for my parents really has carried over into our family dynamics for years. There's a lot of mental health issues. I think my parents too felt so guilty and helpless. And I think it really, for me, drove home how no one was looking out for my parents. No one was looking out for my community. And I think when I was a teacher for a number of years, I really saw that with my own eyes. I really became a teacher because I wanted to be able to show kids, Asian kids, Hispanic kids, how there are teachers who didn't look like them. And we could talk about literature and all the different ways that people are Americans. And I really experienced like racism as a teacher, as an English teacher, in a heavily tested subject. I also saw my, kids who were not white, who were kids of color, being ignored, did not get access to resources because their parents did not have the luxury or even knowledge that they can come and advocate for their kids' needs. So I really saw how the system marginalized, even as a teacher, even as I was speaking up for those kids, how it was really not set up to really protect the most vulnerable. And it really made me feel like, man, I wanted to be able to work on systems level and policies and programs that really was impacting my kids in the classroom. And Joanne and I have a long history, by the way. We mentioned this, but I was 24. I think my second job out of college at a nonprofit was where I met Joanne. She was around my age now when I met her. And I was like, Joanne will be, for everybody in the New York community, this elder and this fierce advocate. And when I met her, I was so amazed because I'm like, wow, there's this older woman who's so badass, so fierce, and so unapologetic. And she, for me over the years, and I left nonprofit for a little bit as teaching and then came back. She actually offered me a job at my wedding the day after I resigned from teaching. She gave me permission, gave people around her permission to fight for your community. And you can do it in all the way to show up in the ways that you can. You don't have to look a certain way. Joanne is very human, she's hilarious. She's not buttoned up and serious. She showed that you can be an advocate, be a human, be vulnerable, and love your community in this way that she knows how. And I think she set an example for me and for many people around her that the injustices that we experienced growing up, that we could do something about it. And Joanne mentioned this, it's a way of being able to fight for our families, being able to fight for the childhood versions of ourselves that never got access or was subjected to treatment that was really hurtful to us. And I think at the Federation, we talk about this as staff all the time, is what brought us to this work, because the passion that we have and the love that we have for our community is really what keeps us going. And Joanne and I, we've been working together now for close to 10 years at the Federation. And I know that the whole world has lived through this, but I think specific to the Federation, we've lived through 4 years of Trump. We lived through COVID. We lived through anti-Asian violence. We're now thinking about election year, potentially what that could look like for our community. So we've lived through some really challenging, a global pandemic. And we've had to show up. And I think it's been a real challenge, but also I would say a real honor to be able to do this work and to be able to show up for our community in the very different ways that we've had to in the past 10 years.
I want to talk about your leadership, especially during the time of the global pandemic. How did you all navigate your leadership during that time? What happened for you as you thought about your team and the mission that you all have and the community you're serving? How did that impact you?
I was in New York working in the aftermath of 9/11. I was working in an immigrant rights organization at the New York Immigration Coalition. And I see another 9/11 coming for the East Asian community. And we really need to get in front of this thing. What's the plan? And demanding answers and never taking no for an answer. It was a time when I knew what was going to happen. right? And I knew that, yes, we were all under the orders of you got to stay home. But I knew people who couldn't stay home. I knew that doctors had to go to work. People who were everyday workers, they had to go to work. I also worried what's going to happen to the service workers when everything's closing. So when we got the order, we were closing the office. My staff, we had a big training about how to use Zoom in the conference room. And I remember I kind of chuckled because staff members came in individually and said, so how long do you think this is going to be? Are we going to be okay? And I said, you guys, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. It's just going to be like a week or two, and then we're going to be back. It's going to be okay. Just hang on for a couple of weeks. That couple of weeks stretched to a couple of months. And I was like, don't worry, you guys, we're going to be back. And that we're going to be back kept stretching and stretching. And during the time, we started to see some very violent things. It was me trying to reassure my staff, reassuring myself, reassuring my own community. But then as the hate crime started happening, it was me and and some of our other senior staff members talking in the middle of the night. There was no clock then, at the beginning of this, calling Ju saying, now what do we do? And Ju saying, I think we have to do something. And Ju is the meticulous one of the office. She's sitting there researching, this is all the things that we need to do. These are all the things we need to place. And so her leading her team, sending stuff at 3 a.m. to review, it was crazy. It was frantic. Because we knew it was doubly hard because we couldn't leave our house.
And in times of crisis, it really kind of brings out the best in leaders and also the worst in leaders. And so I'm curious about, Ju, what do you think it is about Joanne that allows the both of you to just have this powerful dynamic to get through that time, that crisis?
I think we have the advantage of knowing each other really well. It was a crisis that no one had foreseen or experienced, but we had gone through crises before. I think there's just this singular mission of making sure that we can keep our community safe was something that we all kind of like knew our role right away. And I really think the trust that Joanne and I had for me, I think we kind of went into autopilot, but that helped a huge deal knowing that I had this leader, I had a friend that I could trust and rely on all the time. And Joanne talks about these long hours, but it's true. I think all leaders went through this. I think we went through it knowing that at the time, our team, we were fairly small at the time as well, but all of us trusted each other so deeply, and knowing that we'd all show up in whatever ways that everyone did like 10 different jobs during that time. But I think we were just reminiscing about this other day, like how much we were so grateful for the trust and the love that we all had just for the community and the fact that we were all sort of on this mission together. And I think Joanne too, I'm sure so many times of uncertainty of exhaustion, but like the trust that she would ultimately help lead us to help us figure out the answers and work with us to figure out the solutions together. Because I think the one great thing about Joanne is always like, I don't have all the answers. Let's ask people who's done through this before, who can help be thought leaders with us, be thought partners with us, and help us figure out together. And I think the collaborative piece of this work that we do is hugely important in terms of sustainability, in terms of keeping us going, and just building systems together that really do ultimately serve the best interests of all our community members.
When the both of you are at odds on a specific way of doing something, how do you handle that?
We rarely are at odds. I think why our collaboration, our partnership works is because we're very similar, but yet very different. When I think about Ju, I always tell people like, oh, you're an ED, get yourself a Ju. That's what I always say. Get yourself a Ju Han. Ju is in every way, she's incredibly meticulous, right? So as we're thinking about this big picture, she knew who all the people to ask. That really shocked me. Like, how the hell do you know these people? I think it has to do with her being a teacher, that she did her homework. One thing I do really appreciate about Ju, like I said, it really is a very much a complementary partnership and a friendship and, familial relationship. So what I love is that her consideration of it's not just this work, but we also have to think about all the people out in the field who are all our member agencies and their staff who are going out to work every single day. The social services organizations didn't get a break. They didn't get to close. They had to go to work every day. So Ju had to create a program that really got to the heart of how these nonprofits staff members were dealing with their own trauma, being scared to go to work. How was that work? So she did a lot of programming around processing grief, that we saw a lot of stuff that we shouldn't have to see. And so it was always, and maybe it's because we work so well together. I don't have a conflict. I say, Jude, this is the problem. What do you think? And, there's always robust discussion. And then she says, this is what I'm going to go with. And I'm going to say, great, because I know she's done her homework and I know that she has explored every avenue. So what she's telling me is best practice. She's consulted all the people. I think Jude definitely, it's a shared commitment. But like I said, I think it's very complementary. Our personalities are very similar, but yet very different. So I think that's what works for us.
A lot of trust there.
Absolutely. I think, so much so that I think Ju is the one person who is listed on some of my documents as if anything happens to me personally, I'm going to be the person that they're going to call. So just be ready for me.
I work and I speak with a lot of nonprofit executives, and, being an advocate and leaders of a cause in a nonprofit can, of course, be very rewarding, but it can also be very exhausting because I think you mentioned it's like, I've been here for 50 years and yet I'm still seeing issues with language. And why are we still having these issues with language? How do you find that balance between, your career, the drive for the mission, and just kind of taking care of yourself?
Joy, we're both looking at each other. I think it's a process, and I don't know that we have the answer, but I will say it does take a toll. My husband always jokes that he hopes to be as important in my life as my work is. But I think there's a sense of honor in doing this work. I do think, though, that it's a pacing. I think we haven't had much choice, to be honest, in the past 10 years, just because of all the challenges that we just mentioned earlier on. But I do think having really a close-knit group of supporters, of community leaders who you can be really very real and very human is really important. I think that we try to explore and build systems of care, knowing that we have to be in it for the long haul. I do think it's a work in progress, though. It's not an easy answer. We were doing a leadership meeting, and I think a Muslim ED laughed and she said, "I never heard about work-life balance until I started working with Gen Zs," and I thought that was. We all laughed, but we all knew that was not we were not actually a humorous thing. But the fact that we're striving for it, but we understand that it's a challenge. And I have to say, we were just talking about how we have like 4 different generations working at the Federation. Older generations are not the best at it. I think we're very used to working around the clock, but I think we see models of how younger folks are doing it and trying to figure out how we can integrate that into our culture. But I don't know that we have all the answers for that. I think that's definitely something that we continue to learn about and try to pace ourselves.
I think we're the worst teachers, Ju. We're leaders, but it's not just us either. It's our entire leadership team, right? Because I do get texts from other directors at the office at like all hours of the day. And I'm thinking, why are you guys texting me at 1 a.m. and why am I reading this? And they say, oh, I couldn't sleep, so I just decided to work. So we laugh all the time and say we believe in work-life balance, but we're the worst teachers of this stuff. But, I think all this work, the social services work, I think there's a very high price to pay. We've paid a very high price, and I don't think people will ever realize that. It's taken a lot of personal tolls. And one day I was going home. It was like, my gazillionth time of going home at 11 o'clock. And I called you and I said, you know what, you? I think if I were married, I'd be divorced by now, because my husband would say, you never come home, right? But maybe I get to do this work because I'm not married. So that's the thing that we think about. But what you said is right. As leaders, we think about, for instance, funding, right? So how do you get to rest when you don't have enough funding and you're making tough choices about what programs you need? There's a funding cut. Which staff do you cut? How do you juggle all of these things? You're not just making choice for your organization. Your choice as an executive director impacts families, your employees. And in the Asian American nonprofit circle, your employees are part of your family. And it's very, very difficult. Yeah. So it does get to you mentally. And it does. I am comfortable to say, I speak for a lot of executive directors to say, this work is incredibly emotional, and we all pay a very high price for doing this work.
My sister works in the nonprofits and has all of her career, and she works with children that are in the schools that are going through various issues. And drawing those boundaries and turning off and really separating herself, it is difficult. It is very difficult because you don't know where to draw those boundaries. It can be hard. I want to turn a little bit to the work that you do at the Federation. With the work, the words poor and underserved, that's not a word that's often associated with Asians. Because of the model minority myth, I think a lot of people think, so what is that kind of that striking example or fact or story that you tend to share that shocks people into seeing that a good majority of us here in the US are not crazy rich Asians?
I just did a pitch this morning, and this is exactly what I talked about. We are not crazy rich Asians, and we are not the model minority. We have tremendous poverty in our community, and we got numbers. And it is the fact that our community is poor. We are immigrants, we are poor. There's generational poverty. We have things like language barrier and culture barrier that prevents people from moving up the economic ladder. There's a lot of conversations we're having just in our community. And the other shame of all of this is the invisibility, the othering, no matter how long we're here, we're always seen as the other, because how many times have we gotten the stupid question of, where are you really from? Because your English is really good, right? I condensed those two questions into one. But I feel like, for me personally, I feel like my work at the Federation is to constantly bust open the model minority myth. And Drew and I talk about this all the time. We hear all the stories of somebody from our home country who technically they're overeducated, right? They're doctors and lawyers and CPAs and engineers in their home country. And when they come here, they have to start all over again. And they have to start earning and working their way up from the bottom. This is who our community is. And
I do want to say, though, I think that there's even a challenge within our own community where we don't want to recognize that we are an underserved, underrepresented community, like within our Asian community, right? I think there's a segment of that. At least that's what I've come across as, in speaking to whether you're Chinese or you're Indian, that it's almost like, oh no, we're fine. There isn't this kind of issue like you have with other minorities.
We think a lot about how cultural values, how that can be compounded by the model minority myth. There's of like seeking help is shameful behavior. The fact that our community has the largest income or wealth disparity of any racial and ethnic group, I think is very telling. I think one thing that I definitely observed during COVID was that for the first time, a lot of Asian Americans sort of woke up to the fact that all their education, all their language access would not protect them from hate violence. So they've been told, oftentimes all of us, right? The immigrant story, we come here, your parents make all these sacrifices, you get the best education, you get access, and you've made it, right? To be sort of assimilated is a story of success. And we had journalists, we had people who make a lot of money come to us and say, I thought that this wouldn't impact me, and I was assaulted in the streets, or I am experiencing these microaggressions at work. And for the first time, they realize that they are that they will be seen as a person of color, as an Asian American. It will not protect them from hate violence. So it's been really interesting and amazing to see Asian Americans from all sectors, from all walks of life, engage in this issue, because they see themselves in those who are underserved, who are not protected. They see their mothers and the aunties who've gotten assaulted, from the grandmothers who've been lit on fire, their parents in those faces, and for them to realize how important it is for them to engage in these issues that do impact them.
I think 9/11 was probably the wake-up call for a lot of South Asians, when they realized they were brown and that they weren't the primary white race. I don't know, a lot of my uncles would forget. Curious about kind of what's kind of the top of mind right now for the Asian American Federation, and how do you intend to kind of lead the organization toward that vision?
For me, I think the number one question is election. We're doing a lot of scenario planning right now. It's a scary time. There's a lot of different opinions, a lot of feelings. Those are all valid. This is America. People are allowed to feel the way they feel. There's a lot of anger, frustration from not just the Pan-Asian community, but from all the communities. We are after COVID, I said, I hope this is really a moment where we stop, pause, and take stock of what is rebuilding look like. And I hope we never go back to normal. I think one of the things that I think about a lot is leadership development. Drew and I were actually counting EDs. After I became ED, we were counting executive directors who left our field. And we could not believe, I think it was like within like, I don't know, a couple of years. I'm sure it's a shorter time frame. There was 60% ED change in our community. And I said, oh my God, this is horrible.
That is a lot.
There's a huge number. And we were looking at, oh, so who's going to take over? Nobody wanted to take over because it is a sacrifice you have to make, or that we weren't preparing people. So I think for me, that's a sense of urgency that I have. And how do we do right by the future generations? And also the fact that my favorite line of any book that I ever read as a child, even now, is the famous line from, this is my fight for my Pan-Asian community, is from Charlie Brown, from Peanuts. Sally Brown says, I only want my fair share. I only want what's coming to me. And I thought no truer lines were spoken. We only want our fair share. We only want what's coming to us. We are here. We contribute to this country. We are part of the neighborhood. We want to be recognized. And really the work is, how do we demand that we are seen and that we are recognized?
Thank you, first off, for all the wonderful work that the both of you are doing. There is so much more left to be done, but yet there is so much that has been done. And I have to give both of you credit for, and the Asian American Federation, for being that voice for the Asian American community. So thank you. For those of you who want to know more about the Asian American Federation, make sure to visit their website at www.aafederation.org. And if you're interested in more stories like Joanne's and Ju's and other AAPI women that are making their mark as executives, be sure to join our community. You can find us on LinkedIn, catch full interviews on YouTube, or if you're short on time, catch us on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you for joining us.